Good evening, good morning. Welcome to week 2 of PSSL 6251 Interagency Cooperation here at George Washington University. I just want to start off with a quick intro. For the most part, just talk about the discussion posts. I think they were, for the most part, good. I'll talk one-on-one with you this week with my own comments, but for the most part, they were good. And I think the discussion posts and the rebuttal arguments were also pretty strong. The one thing I ask is that these discussions should have your analysis on it, your points that you want to bring up. So make sure you do the lectures and the readings and bring those up, but I don't want just a rehash of those readings. I want you to discuss, analyze, and bring up the key points, as well as integrate your own personal statements or personal experiences into each one of those points. So good overall, and I'll have those marked this week. Groups, simulation groups, for those of you who don't know, those of you who haven't read ahead, we're doing a simulation week 8. Next week, I will break you guys into groups so you can start at least thinking about the simulation. We're not doing it till week 8, so you have plenty of time, but I want you to start thinking about the simulation with your groups as we go through the rest of this course. So reviewing last week, very good discussion on fusion centers. And the two questions we asked are they effective, and do they negate privacy issues, or do they undermine privacy issues? And I think we had a good discussion on whether they were effective. I think the class pretty much split down the middle, whether it was worth the investment or not. The one thing to consider for fusion centers or whatever else other counterterrorism programs are not just how many people you've caught, how many terrorists you stopped, but how many you've actually deterred. TSA, and I used to work at TSA, one of the questions that always came up was, all right, how many bombs have you picked up? How many hijackers have you stopped? How many September 11th have you stopped? And the answer was always none. But the fact that there is a guy patting you down or putting you through a screener or a guy checking your suitcase deters people from trying to use commercial aviation as a vector for terrorism. So that is the question you need to ask is not just how many raw numbers have you caught, but do the fusion centers actually deter terrorists? And we can debate that till we're blue in the face, but that's something that needs to be part of the equation. The one thing I think there was some confusion on was the watch listing function of DHS or the fusion centers. What you guys need to know is watch lists are what we list terrorists as. So if you're boarding a flight or you're trying to get sensitive a position at like a nuclear power reactor or a hazmat driver, that your name is cross-referenced against a watch list, and we can make sure that you don't get on the flight and don't put yourself in a position where you can do harm. There was some confusion here that the fusion centers actually don't do watch lists. The watch lists are determined by people at the federal law enforcement level, the FBI, Homeland Security. But the watch list, the fusion centers actually should be getting the watch lists so the cop on the beat can actually cross-reference against a potential watch list. And just to give you a kind of a one over the world of watch lists, the watch list we keep, there's about 4 or 5 of them. There's the TIE database, which stands for Terrorist Identities Data Market. That has about 1 million people in it. There's probably a good chance someone in this program might be in the TIE database. It is far too big, far too cumbersome. You can be put in the TIE database for something like you brought in some food from overseas and customs flagged you and put you in the TIE database. Then you have the terrorist screening list database. That's a little bit more refined. That means that your whatever flagged you is more terrorist related, but we're still talking hundreds of thousands of people in that database. Then you have the TSA selectee list, and that is about 50,000 people. And then that's usually people who have some sort of connection to terrorism, but no relation to bomb-making material or no known intent to commit terrorism. So they might have been on a chat room with Anwar al-Awlaki, no terrorist. They might have been using terrorist social networks and YouTube videos. So you'd be on the selectee list, which means that you would get further screening when you come into an airport. Then you have the no-fly list, which is about 8,000 to 10,000 people, and those are people who have known associations with terrorists, not just casual social media, but they know they have known associations. And then amidst that, you have the people that actually are capture or kill. A couple of hundred people, capture, kill, arrest on site. That the law enforcement agencies determine that you are definitely a high threat and you will be arrested or detained. So those are your watch lists. So it goes everyone from the Tide database, which is 1 million people, the terrorist screening list, which is several 100,000 people, the selectee list, which is a few thousand, 30, 40,000, the no-fly list, which is about 10,000, and then the kill capture list, which is in the hundreds. The goal is to have that list down at the lowest level, which is what the fusion centers do. However, there are privacy issues with that, and you got to think when you think about this, it's actually pretty. I don't want to say un-American, but it's the only thing that without due process, without a trial, a federal agency, a federal official can put you on one of these lists, and you can't fly a plane. You can't get certain jobs. You can't live your life unencumbered. That's pretty. You haven't done anything wrong, or you haven't. I don't want to say you haven't done anything wrong, but you haven't been convicted. You've been put in trial. Child molesters. We might have lists of those. But those are people who are convicted of a crime, who have given due process. People on selectee lists don't have due process. So I'm not going to say those are bad. It's a bad thing to have these lists. In fact, I worked on these lists, and it's very essential what we do. But it also can go into those privacy issues or those extrajudicial realm that we're worried about. So I just want to kind of give that heads up of some of the privacy issues we might have with the fusion centers or with pushing down the watch listing function. Next week, we talk international police cooperation, interagency and international roles. You will read chapters 1 through 2 in the Lemieux book, as well as chapter 9. Chapter 9 is an excellent chapter on EU and counterterrorism and cooperation between the United States and the European Union. But one of the themes that we're going to see in this next week is the different approaches to counterterrorism, to military operations between the Europeans and the United States. The Kagan article that I've assigned, written in 2002, there's a little bit of hyperbole. It was before the Iraq War, so take it with a little bit of grain of salt. But he does outline, why Europeans and the United States think differently about military force. The U.S. appears, whether you agree or not, appears to the Europeans to be more militaristic, more focused on terrorism, more shoot from the hip, for lack of a better term. The Europeans seem more, to the Americans, seem more lax, more allowing the terrorist entity to occur. And if you look back on the 9/11 hijackers, Mohammed Atta, some of the others, actually operated freely out of Europe to conduct their attacks on 9/11. So those are the perceptions of the U.S., perceptions of the Europeans, and just kind of the big reason why it's outlined in the Kagan. Europe had the experiences of World War I and World War II. And as I speak now, it's the 100-year anniversary of the start of World War I. And we never had these kind of global shocks. We had World War II, but if you look at the impact World War II had on us, vice Europe, it's eons different. And World War I, even though the United States was involved in World War I, the greater impact was on European countries, and they lost millions of their men, and they lost millions of their civilians during the Second World War. We haven't experienced that, and that experience kind of tempers European attitudes towards military, towards counterterrorism, towards law enforcement. There's a big cultural difference. I want to give you a personal experience. I mentioned earlier I worked at TSA, and something I worked on was the implementation of those body scanners. When you go to the airport, you raise your hand, you go through that scanner, and that's fine and dandy in the United States, but there's no protection if the person's traveling from a European city like Paris, London, and traveling to the United States. And so the question is, one of the things we wanted to do is employ those body scanners, and the Europeans were hesitant. They didn't want to militarize their airport checkpoints. So that's kind of a personal experience on the different viewpoints on terrorism. The other not personal experience of mine, but another thing that we're seeing in the news is that the Europeans have a very hands-off approach to their Islamic minorities. And I'm not trying to sound ethnocentric or anything like that, but they have a little bit more of a hands-off approach to them than we do. And a lot of the reasons is, France had occupied Algeria, and there's a large Algerian diaspora in France, and France had kind of a hands-off view on it, at least compared to what we might think of that viewpoint. So that's going to be a theme for this upcoming week. Just wanted to kind of introduce you. Look forward to your discussion points and your posts this week. Last thing I want to say is there's a paper due, 1,200 to 1,500 words. It's on multi-jurisdictional case, as if you were looking at that in Nevada, and it's based on, or Arizona, or Utah, I'm sorry, and it's based on the readings from week 1 about the DC sniper, about multi-jurisdictional cases, and establishing solid memorandums of understanding. But what I want to talk to the paper, the content is important, but your writing mechanics for this first paper are just as important. And what I want to see is this. I want to see, the first thing is a strong thesis. I want you to tell me what is wrong and what you think is causing the situation to be fouled up. So right from the front, don't make me guess. Tell me that right from the front. Then I want each paragraph, and again, these are short papers, so they're not, you have to make sure every sentence counts. And I want you to make sure when you introduce every paragraph that you're introducing evidence that backs up your thesis. All right? There shouldn't be a paragraph out there that's out on the wind. Every paragraph has got to count, and it's got to back up your thesis. Then I wanted you to have solid policy recommendations that kind of that are based on the evidence and your thesis. Don't just give me policy recommendations out of the blue. I want to see that process from a thesis to evidence to policy recommendations based on that evidence. And I want to see that in the first paper. I want to see that on all your papers. Again, these are short papers. They're not long. You use outside research, but a lot of it is based on research that we do in class. And yeah, it's got to be short, concise papers that are readable. So that being said, I look forward to your discussion posts, and if there's any questions or issues, please let me know.